Steve here, Episcopal Priest, serving the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. And today we're doing Revelation Bible Study, chapter 12 of the book of Revelation. So go ahead and read chapter 12, and then we'll come back and begin look at my notes I have for you from chapter 12, and also look at the N.T. Wright Bible study. So go ahead and read chapter 12. Okay, welcome back. So, the woman, the dragon, and the child. Many biblical commentators will say that chapter 12 is the heart of Revelation. The power of evil, represented by a monster, is radically opposed to the Messiah and his people, filled with hatred. The evil spares no pains to destroy Christ and his church. The beast is seen here is the Roman Empire, as seen here. Verses 1 through 6 of chapter 12, the dragon seeks to destroy the woman and her child. A woman, most ancient commentators identified her with the church. In the Middle Ages, it was held that she represented Mary, the mother of Jesus, but many other commentators will say that the Roman Catholic Church championed this as a Marian interpretation. And other scholars see the woman as a symbol of Israel. The 12 stars, the 12 tribes of Israel. 7 heads and 7 horns, may be referring to Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 8. Cried out in her pangs of birth. The arrival of a new age was compared to childbirth, and we see that maybe in Isaiah 66, verses 7 through 14. The great dragon, a mythical monster also known as Leviathan in Psalm 74, verse 13. Cast into earth, the fall of rebel angels in Jude chapter 6. And of chapter 12, verses 7 through 12, Michael's victory over the dragon. So let's take a look at N.T. Wright's book, Revelation, 22 Studies for Individuals and Groups. Use this as our resource guide from N.T. Wright again. So take a look at, as we begin, and he always has an interesting story to begin our chapter. I once attended a memorial service for a famous sportsman, a cricketer who had been a boyhood hero for me and for many others. The church was packed, and a special place was reserved for other cricketers who played with or against a great man and who had come to pay their respects. I was standing near the door when these other cricketers, a few dozen of them, walked in, and it was a very frustrating moment. Most of them, without a doubt, had also been household names. But for me and many others who were there, it was impossible to identify most of them. We remembered how they looked in their sporting prime, in their teens, 20s, and 30s. Now in their 60s, 70s, in some cases 80s, they were unrecognizable. That problem of identification is, of course, a problem with which we face in chapter after chapter of Revelation. We see these characters come and go across the pages. We know that there's a high probability that John intends them to represent symbolically some biblical theme or person, or as in chapter 11, the corporate identity of God's people. But we wish he could have given them at least a little label now and then to give us a clue. So kind of an icebreaker question here. Have you ever had difficulty identifying someone you thought you should know? Were there any clues that eventually helped you figure out who it was? Okay. So let's go into a question here. Read Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. What 2 signs appear in heaven? And that's verse 1 and 3. What 2 signs appear in heaven? Okay. Another question. What clue does John give us in verse 5 about the identity of the woman's child? See also Psalm 2:9. What clue does John give us in verse 5 about the identity of the woman's child? And also you need to look at Psalm 2, verse 9. Okay, the dragon is a figure of considerable power. Why does he seek to devour the child? Why does the dragon seek to devour the child? Okay, give you a chance to look at those. Okay, when we go to verses 5 and 6, how are the mother and her child protected? We look at verses 5 through 6. How are the mother and her child protected? And look at verses 5 through 6. Now here's one for discussion for you. How are God's people under attack from dark spiritual forces today? How are God's people under attack from dark spiritual forces today? So jump ahead on a question here. We look at verses 7 through 18 of chapter 12. Who is involved in the war that breaks out in heaven? And more particularly, look at verse 7. Who is involved in the war that breaks out in heaven? And more particularly, look at verse 7. A somewhat easy question here. John does not leave us guessing this time who the dragon is. He is clearly identified as the devil and the Satan, literally the accuser. And look at verse 10. What happens to the dragon and his angels after the war? And we'll look at verses 8 through 9. So what happens to the dragon and his angels after the war? More particularly, look at verses 8 and 9. Now this is kind of an interesting question that N.T. Wright throws out here. And this is looking at verse 11. So take a look at verse 11. If the war has taken place in heaven, why are the Lamb's people on earth given credit for the victory instead of Michael or God himself? If the war has taken place in heaven, why are the Lamb's people on earth given credit for the victory instead of Michael or God himself? Okay? And we look at verses 13 and 15. What does the dragon do once he is thrown down to earth? Seeks revenge, right? And the last question I have for you on chapter 12. What hope and strength does this chapter give as we face those challenges? And we've talked about this in the last several weeks in several sessions. What hope and strength does this chapter give as we face those challenges? Okay? So there you go. Again, I'm Father Steve, Episcopal Priest, serving here in the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. And we're studying the book of Revelation. So have some very interesting discussions with this study, and God bless.